Hey ladies and gentlemen, this is Miss Humbert here, and today we're going to be doing Unit 1 Notes 4. So we are going to be talking about calculating slope. So let's go ahead and let's talk about calculating slope by looking at the slope formula. So here is the slope formula. So if we're given a point x1, y1 and a point x2, y2, then this is our formula. So you're going to take the second y coordinate and subtract the first y coordinate. Then you're going to take the second x coordinate and subtract the first x coordinate. So we're going to spend a lot of time today simply using that formula and practicing with that. But before we do that, we need to look at the different types of slopes. So the first one is a positive slope. So a slope is positive if, well, the slope is positive, okay? So if the number you calculate out is a positive number, it's going to be a positive line going upwards. If the line is going down, that means it's a negative slope. So that means the number you calculated for the slope is going to be negative. Now, sometimes we have a horizontal line. So that horizontal line is going to run parallel to the x-axis. Now, the x-axis is the horizontal one. The y is the vertical one. So if you have a horizontal line, that means that your slope is 0. Okay, and last but not least, if you have a vertical line, that means your slope is undefined. A lot of times we see undefined numbers as dividing by 0. So hopefully you remember that in math, we can't divide by 0. So if you ever get a slope and you're dividing by 0, that means that the slope is undefined. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at some of these calculations. So we need to calculate the slope between the following 2 points. So I like to go through and actually label it x1, y1, x2, y2. And then I'm going to go ahead and calculate out the slope between them. So I'm going to take the second y coordinate, which is 16, and subtract the first y coordinate, which is 8, because I got that here. Then on the bottom, I'm going to take the second x coordinate, which is 9, and subtract the first x coordinate, which is 2. So 16 minus 8 is 8. And 9 minus 2 is 7. So this is the fraction right here. 8 divided by 7 for number 1. Let's take a look at number 2. So again, for number 2, we want to label it out. So what we're going to do is we're going to do x1, y1, x2, y2. So then what we want to do is we want to do y2, which is negative 15, minus y1. So here we're subtracting off a negative. And whenever you subtract off a negative, that's going to become plus a positive. So I like to write it as plus plus. Okay, so then on the bottom we're going to take negative 7, and then we're going to subtract off our x1, which is 19. So it really helps if you label it out, because then all you have to do is plug in the numbers. So negative 15 plus 16 is going to give us 1. Negative 17 minus 19, when you have a negative number and you subtract off another number, that means that you're going to have a larger negative number. So I really took 7 and 19 and added them together, and it's going to be negative since they are both negative. Now, let's take a look at number 3. So for number 3, again, I want to label my x1 and my y1 and so forth. So x1, so you need to have an x and a y in every single parenthesis. So I have x1, y1, x2, y2. So now to calculate this out, I have y2 minus y1. Again, I'm subtracting a negative, so I'm going to change that to be plus a positive. And then on the bottom, y2 minus y1. So now I have negative 19 plus 19, which is going to give me 0. Negative 2 minus 1, again, that's going to get more negative, so that's going to be a negative 3. Well, 0 divided by any number is always going to be 0. So this one has a slope of 0, which means it's going to be a horizontal line. Now let's take a look at number 4. So we have x1, y1, x2, y2. So let's go ahead and let's take a look. So I have y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Again, I want to change that to be plus a positive. So negative 4 minus 7, again, that's going to get more negative because both of those numbers that we're adding are negative. And then negative 6 plus 4 is going to give me a negative 2. Well, here I'm taking a negative number and I'm dividing it by another negative number. When you're dividing by two negative numbers, it's actually going to become positive. Whenever you multiply or divide two negative numbers, they become positive. So then my slope is actually 11 over 2, or 11 halves. And with slopes, we always leave it as a fraction. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at number 5. So for number 5, what we want to do is calculate the slope between these 2 points again. So I have x1, y1, x2, y2. That is a really poorly drawn x. So I'm going to do y2, which is negative 15, minus y1, which is 0. And then I'm going to have x2, which is 3, minus x1, which is also 3. So negative 15 minus 0 is negative 15, and 3 minus 3 is 0. So notice how there's a 0 on the bottom. We talked about how 0 cannot be on the bottom. So that is going to be undefined. Okay, so that is undefined. That would be a vertical line, but the slope itself is undefined. Now let's take a look at number 6. So I have x1, y1, x2, y2. So then let's go ahead and let's subtract. So I have y2 minus y1. Remember, whenever you subtract a negative, it becomes plus a positive. And x2 minus x1. So 10 plus 2 is 12. Negative 11 minus 9. Now when you're adding two negative numbers, it becomes more negative. So that's going to give us a negative 20. So here I have 12 divided by negative 20. Okay, well, both of these could be divisible by 4. So we want to reduce that fraction. 12 and 20 are both divisible by 4. 12 divided by 4 is going to give me 3. Negative 20 divided by 4 is going to give me a negative 5. Well, we can go ahead and pull that negative out front. So we end up with the fraction negative 3/5 for number 6. Next, let's take a look at this calculating the slope from a graph. Now here I suggest you pause the video and get this written down. So slope is always calculated rise over run. So we're figuring out how much we're going up and then how much we're going over. So first thing you need to do is find 2 points. Okay, so pick 2 points on your graph. And then you have to figure out how many you go up or down. Here's what I want you to write, that up is positive and down is negative. So if you go down, that's a negative number. So what you want to do is always start with the farmost left point, because then for step number 3, you're going to figure out how many points you're going to the right. So the number of points that you go to the right is the denominator. Down and left are both negative. I think that's a really important point to remember, is that if you go down or you go left, both of those are going to create negative values. So let's go ahead and let's put this into practice. So first thing we need to do on number 7 is identify 2 points. Now points are going to be where it crosses the corner of a square. So I see that it crosses a corner here, and I see that it also crosses a corner way up here. So those are 2 points on the graph. And in fact, I don't even have to necessarily figure out what those points are because I'm just looking at the slope. So the first thing I want to do is figure out how far we're going up, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to go ahead and write 5 down because I went up 5. Now I need to figure out how much I go to the right because that's my denominator. Notice I started at the farmost left point. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and then I went right 3. So 5/3 is your calculation for number 7. Now let's take a look at number 8. We're crossing a point here and we're crossing a point here. If you wanted to pick this point and this point, you could. It doesn't matter what points you pick because the slope should be the same throughout the whole line. So here we're going up 1 and over 1, 2, 3, 4. So how many I went up goes on top, which is 1, and then I went over 4. So my slope is 1 over 4. Rise over run. Let's take a look at the last 2 problems here. So taking a look at number 9. So for number 9, again, we want to pick 2 points. So I'm going to pick a point here. I see that that's a point because it's crossing a corner. And I see that this is a point here because it's crossing a corner. So now I want to figure out my rise or I'm actually going down. So I'm going down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now remember that down is negative, so when I make my slope, I'm going to write that as a -6 because I went down 6. And then I notice that I go over 1, so then my denominator is 1. Well, -6 divided by 1, that's something that's pretty simple for us to figure out, and that's just going to be -6, because -6 divided by 1 is simply -6. Now let's take a look at number 10. Now number 10, we're crossing, I would say here, we're crossing here, we're crossing here. You can use any of those points if you'd like. So we're crossing here, and I notice that we're going down 1. So my numerator needs to be a -1. And then we're going to the right, 1, 2, 3. So because that's our run over, that's going to be a +3. So then our slope is -1/3. So that concludes your note video for today. Go ahead and show me a completed note sheet once you are done. Thanks for listening.